Hello friend, we're going to make a very unusual kitchen. It's probably going to go against hundreds of years of cabinetry wisdom. It's on a ridiculously tight budget. The tops are going to be made of offcuts and scraps, and honestly I've got no idea whether any of this will work, but if it does, it'll be quite something. This is going to be our first cupboard cabinet thing. It's going to hold up an immensely heavy sink. Heavier still when it's full of water. But let's back up a moment and look at the space we're dealing with. There are a couple of basics that any kitchen benefits from. That's lots of natural light, especially near the sink, and a nice warm floor. These aren't things you can easily do after making a kitchen, so it's a good job we did the floor in a previous video and now the window's done. The impossibly good view and the way it opens are important for the kitchen design. It might seem strange to start with this sink carcass considering there's so much to learn, but we had to be living in this cottage while we were making it, and running water's really quite handy. We want everything in this kitchen to be really strong, so we went and bought some plywood for these units. Well, we mixed that with scraps that we had. For example, this back piece here, we're making out of reclaimed shower wall, which is quite a high quality plywood. What you see here is proof that just because you've made a highly precise CNC machine doesn't mean you have any idea how to use it well. In this case, I way underestimated the upwards forces caused by a regular helical upcut bit when taking heavy cuts. Even after adding some screws closer to the corner, you can still see it lifting up. As the material is being curved, it's not going to create a square, straight edge. Now, many kitcheneers may think this back panel that's 12mm thick would be a bit overkill, but one of the reasons I wanted to cut it out on the CNC rather than a table saw was that it will make the whole unit absolutely dead square and ensure the sides are completely parallel. This first carcass gave us a few design lessons, more on that later, but mostly it demonstrated we really need to rethink our clamping strategies. Kitchen sink cabinet is together. Moment of truth. We're putting the backboard. It's going to slide down these strips here, and it's quite tight. I should have put clearances on, but I'm going to try and ram it home. Bit of glue should lubricate things, but also make it permanent and be a bit of a gamble. Let's try it. It's pretty sturdy. These ridiculously heavy oak slabs have just been outside under a tin sheet in the Welsh climate, so they have been drying, but they certainly need to acclimatise to the cottage. If you're interested in chainsaw milling, how that works and whether you might be able to do it, then I've linked to those videos down below, along with a book that Sam and I have written. Now, this was part of the tree where the main trunk divides into two, and despite stacking and stickering it all very well, there's quite a few new cracks. Here it is. I'm wondering if we've bitten off more than we can chew. It is amazing. It's just so... I'm not sure if it's going to come across on camera, but there's like dips and twists and all kinds of variation in thickness. The crack here is actually going kind of into the wood that way. I think it would look amazing. I mean, just look at these medulla rays around here. So that's it. That is the artwork we've got to try not to ruin as we coax it into a semblance of a kitchen. Every cut on these massive slabs is pretty nerve-wracking. I'm triple checking with the physical space of the kitchen and going a bit oversize, not trusting the plans. The mission at the moment is to surface this into something flat, then resaw it, which just means to split it into 2 slabs of half the thickness, and then get it into the cottage where it can trip us up and get in the way for the next few months while it dries out to something approximating the right moisture content, so that when it's finally made into the door fronts and so on, it's not going to warp even more all over the place. The slab's so excitingly warped that even after knocking off the highest spots manually-ish, the flattening takes really quite a long time. If any of the servo drives throws an error, it stops the whole machine, and that's what you just saw happening. I thought this was probably because a bit of debris got caught in the ball screw. So to try and keep out flying oak chips, I made these felt wipers from some bits of an old piano that a friend gave me. One scrap of PVC pipe carries the felt wipers and spring loads them, and another slightly bigger piece joins that wiper carrier to the rotating ball nut. The other side of the ball nut was a bit more awkward. Here's how these fit. They're just fitting into these slots and the locking nuts. Something. It's very imprecise. I'm hoping the felt will just sort of conform to it. I'm a bit less sure of the security of this side. Hopefully they won't fly off and do the opposite of what I intend. Well, after making those, the problem became more persistent. The following week was spent switching cables, switching servo drives, switching servos, testing and then retesting, and then devising a better test, and finally narrowing it down to the encoder on one of the servos, which had malfunctioned, essentially meaning one side of the gantry was being driven more than the other side, resulting in huge torsional forces that I'm lucky didn't tear the gantry apart, but instead resulted in over-torque errors on the servo drives. So after flattening that board, we can finally now resaw it using the chainsaw mill. This is really quite a challenge because it's just dry, hard oak. It is much harder to cut through, much harsher on the chain of the chainsaw than green oak. As the chain's cutting through this swirly, interlocking, crazy grain, I can tell that tension's being relieved by the way the wedges are sitting in the curve of the cut. I thought I would have way ample amounts of thickness to make these boards into drawer fronts and doors. Now I'm a bit nervous about how much they might move over in the cottage during their final drying. Before shifting them over, I'm putting in some reinforcement pieces just to hopefully prevent these cracks from widening anymore and to stabilize a little bit. This is the kind of thing I built the CNC for. It's just wonderful at these jobs where you want to cut out a big batch of something rather and match it to an exactly precise hole. I really like having the gentle curve on these structural ties, which is really easy to do with the CNC. You will notice the chisels there though. I still do have to sharpen up the corners of the hole where the router bit leaves a radius. Before starting the kitchen, unbelievably I didn't really know what parametric modelling was, and oh my goodness, is it a game changer. Example, here's one of the early versions of our base cabinet units. Say we're messing around and we want to change the width of it, we just come into parameters here, let's up that to a meter, hit return, every part of the model updates. Another example for all the toe stubbing contemplators out there, we ummed and ahed about the toe kick size here for a while. There's no definitive standard and we're making it from scratch, so let's imagine we have really low feet. So we can lower that a little bit, and let's say we have ridiculously long feet. There we go, not stubbing our toes now, are we? It takes a bit more time to build a model that has all this parametricness or parameters defined, but let's say we needed to change something quite fundamental, like the material we were building the unit from. This here, for example, is 18mm thick marine grade plywood. Though of course when it arrives it's more like 17.1 millimeters. No problem, hop into the modelling program, put that into the material thickness parameters, and we're good to go. Now all the grooves and recesses we're about to machine will automatically update. Most of the holes drilled in the plywood are exactly spaced for drawer slides, and then there are a few that are just screw holes for joining the panels together. We have completely solved our kerfuffles of earlier where we weren't holding the plywood down well enough. That's now being done with a helical carbide down cutting bit. Just as the regular helical bits try and peel the plywood off the surface, the down cut bit pushes it onto the spoil board. The side fence in combination with a few screws holds it there really nicely. There it is, complete cupboard. I haven't got the sink on over there yet because it's easier to get to the plumbing now. I'm going to try and keep this all quite far back on that back surface there, as we've got lots to fit in. 2 water heaters are going to have to go in front of this pipe work, one for the boiling water tap and one for the hot water. Let's put it on and see if we can't get the waste roughly planned out at least. It's quite a tight fit in here as well. Re-grip. Good thing the cabinet's pretty sturdy. So, yeah, it's going to be something like that. Oh yeah. 3, 2, 1. Okay, it's fair to say we've got dripping. Well, I didn't think that would work, and congratulations, I proved myself right. So now we'll do it properly. I just had to go and double check those big rubber gaskets wouldn't be enough on their own. This here is the water heater, and upon instruction-defying investigation, it's a little bit disappointing. A rating, costs quite a bit more, but then when you look at it, there's like big uninsulated patches just knocking around. I'm even tempted to stick a bit of aerogel down the side there. Okay, there we go down there. We've stuffed in some aerogel. I mean, it's just sloppy manufacturing, that is. Yeah, you've got to cut a slot to slide the insulation together, but... And then it was time for some sloppy manufacturing of my own, as I realised there's no way I'm getting this water heater in without increasing the height a little bit. My fault completely, but still kind of irksome considering the tank is so much smaller than the outer casing. Right, it's coming together nicely. Using small smidgens of glue. I guess I should say that carcasses like this could easily be made without a ridiculous CNC machine. Although a benefit of doing it this way is that I can be very confident of the squareness of all the parts, and all the routed grooves make fitting the panels together really quite satisfying. You know what they say about clamps, and it's all true. This is 10mm thick, and it's not what I normally do, this kind of edge banding onto plywood. This is how I've attached it. I've just got wedges rammed behind clamps that are clamped quite firmly to the plywood there. Designing and making a kitchen like this with Sam was just a dream come true, and there was only one ongoing real battle, and that was the shame and guilt I felt at the preposterous amount of time it was taking to do this kitchen. None of my friends or family would consider indulging in such a wacky project when you can literally have a kitchen bought up and running within a couple of weeks. Of course, something of similar quality would be very expensive. At least that's what I'm telling myself. But then at this point in the project, I didn't really know how it was going to turn out. Super unique high quality was what I was aiming for, but there's no saying I'm hitting that target. In the very long meantime, Sam's essentially putting up with living in a building site without any furniture. So yeah, incredibly satisfying to make something so bespoke and get to use the CNC machine, but an experiment that was tinged with a measure of fear and shame. That created a huge amount of dust. over pretty much everything. So on bleeds I've got the wipers on there. Well, the corner cabinets are usually cut off at the corner at a kind of 45-degree for this very reason of getting through doors is pretty difficult, sometimes impossible. If worst came to worst, we were thinking that you could just get it in through the big window if nothing else. But Sam's not here, we'd need, I think, 2 people for that. So it's wiggle jiggle through this doorway. None of the storage below the height of the worktop will be traditional cupboards. It's all going to be pull-out drawers. The only exception to this is under the sink when there's lots of plumbing to deal with, and this corner cabinet where you'd lose a big chunk of the storage if you had drawers. Well, that was easy. Good solid bit of kit this. Once it's in place as well, it'll be locked to its neighbouring cabinets and screwed to the wall, so I don't think it's going anywhere, even with that usual monkeying around on the sides. Hello. The first drawer was very rudimentary, just to test the dimensions for the drawer slides and how it fit in the cabinets and make sure everything was right. It's made with very simple butt joints, this groove being routed along the bottom, which holds the bottom panel in place. I'm very glad we didn't just batch out a load without testing, because this first one was wrong, being ever so slightly too long. Seems I had misread the datasheet on the drawer slides, but an update to the parameters in Fusion 360 and we were off to the races. So far so good. I've tried to lay this out so it'll avoid the scrappiest bits over there. Let's see what we're dealing with here. Ooh, what a fit. This plywood's really rough. A local company gave it to us as offcuts from the process of making really big packing crates. These boards are a bit of a shame. They've got one wet corner where the roof's been leaking on them. So I'm having to try and avoid that particular corner on all my cutouts. After making a bunch of drawers and having to tidy up all the corners of all the finger joints by hand, we added in some relief cuts or Mickey Mouse ears in the CAD, using a 1/8 inch down cut bit to cut them out. These are barely noticeable on close inspection. Once assembled and glue squeezes into the little ears, I can confidently say it's the way to go for this kind of construction, especially when the front's going to be covered up. Once we have all the inside sanded and the bottom made, we can assemble it and then finally sand the outside of it. What's pleasing after the kerfuffles of earlier with clamping down is that we've pretty much solved that with double-sided tape and a down cutting bit. It's simple and quick to set up, and I don't need to worry about banging into any clamps or screws. Gone and been slightly preemptive with the oven wiring in. I wanted to check that all worked because it's not a new one. Though it is a nice clean one, I could easily mistake it for a new one. Quite excited about that. It's the exact one that Sam wanted. The bin drawer and other such things are a go. Look at that. Oh. Thus far we've used all Bloom, Movento drawer runners with their soft closiness. We've got some 70 kilogram ones down the bottom for the bigger drawer, but they are just so expensive that we're trying some eBay jobbies that kind of have a similar hole pattern. And I don't know anything about them or whether they work, but they're less than half the price, so I thought it'd be worth giving them a try. The number of them and the roughness of the plywood they're made from made the sheer volume of sanding on these drawers quite punishing. Luckily for us, Sam quite likes painting type jobs, and the drawers all get finished with a few coats of Osmo. It's time to put some of these drawers in place. There's a few things I really love about these drawer slides. One is how easily they click in and out of place. In operation, their smoothness is just absolutely buttery. And I must admit, the Bloom ones do seem quite a bit nicer than the eBay ones. The other thing to admire about these drawer slides is that they add robustness to the drawers. As a scrounger of materials from broken old furniture, I've seen quite a lot of failed drawers, and it's often that the bottoms break out from the sides. These runners being mounted under the drawer, as well as being full extension, support the bottom directly. We want the worktop extending all the way back along there, so we're just cutting up and putting in these panels. Despite being quite large, everything you see here is a Quartz worktop offcut. We managed to get enough matching bits to do the whole kitchen. Even including delivery, this came to just £300, which is probably less than you'd pay even for plastic coated chipboard type worktop. Compared to getting granite or quartz professionally installed, it's really a fraction of the price. The quartz is 30mm thick, and it more or less maxes out this little tile saw, and I have to do a number of shallow passes, especially when going backwards or doing plunging kind of danger cuts. Yeah, the window's going to need cleaning. Despite that, the wet saw works really quite well, but I had to go and overcomplicate it by using the CNC machine with a little diamond burr type bit. The guys who delivered the stone normally do installs. They were curious when we got chatting that I was going to be attempting it, and were kind enough to give me some sanding pads. It's an immediate fail. I didn't realise the centrifugal forces of a regular angle grinder would just make a backing pad fly apart. Really, you need one with variable speed to make these work. With that particular curve done, which I found much less pleasing in real life than on the CAD model, I need to square up or dress the ends of this so that it mates perfectly with its counterpart. This probably wouldn't have been necessary if I was a bit more careful with the track saw on that edge. Okay, I've spent a while fiddling around with the levels and whatnot. I think we're ready to stick it down and make the join. Well, I saved some dust for it, but it's turned out way browner than the white I was hoping for. After plenty of fussing about and some initial squeeze, here's the wacky setup I have for joining these two pieces. I'm using my two longest clamps joined together from either end. In the middle we're using some little clamps and an engineer's parallel to try and keep the surface completely flat or unlipped. I've just finished doing a little sand to make that absolutely level. Is it as perfect as I would like? No. Is it quite good and totally tolerable? Yes. So now I get to do this. What's super fun about building a kitchen is that after you've been without things like hot water and a hob for some time, it's just mega exciting to start getting them in action. There we go. Somehow I didn't manage to record me jamming my fingers under there. But it went in nicely. Unlike the hole we cut out for the hob, the edges of the sink are all going to be visible, and so I want to be way more careful with how these corners end up. Though of course I still have the plan of overcomplicating it by going onto the CNC machine, which is where we're off to now. The CNC is so slow at removing material, I really tried to cut close to the finish line beforehand. After getting a feel for it a bit more, I'm rounding the corners off by hand now. The internal corners of the sink cutout I'll still do on the CNC, so both sides match exactly. But most other bits I've basically determined are way quicker by drill and angle grinder. It is just gonna be awesome. Once we've got the other half of that in, and then this bit, yeah, it'll be great. Not a bad window to do your washing up at. In case the speeding up and cutting out of footage is giving the wrong impression, let me just say this is just a really large amount of work, and things sped up and got smoother as I went on and learned roughly what I was doing. But still, the head scratching, the jigsawing together the offcuts, marking them out, cutting them to size, and then shaping and chamfering them all. Well, let's just say there's probably a good reason the pros consider these offcuts. The final cut, and I must admit I'm quite excited about it. I've had enough of the epic amounts of dust, the way it makes my hands go a bit grimy and dry and sore. We've got these how we want them. The question basically becomes, how can we being me, lift them off and back on once I've put some blobs of supporting sealant stroke adhesive down. So how do we do this without scratching the sink or doing anything else terrible? I bet some of you have a good answer to that question. I, of course, did not. That wasn't as controlled as I'd hoped. Very poor. So that embarrassing little overestimate of my strengths was very luckily not catastrophic. And somehow I was able to handle the second piece, I think it's quite a bit smaller, with a little bit more finesse, without even a single jammed finger. After manoeuvring this stuff quite a bit though, I did have 2 matching bruises at the top of each thigh. For all the further joints, I'm using a relatively cheap seam setter, which is essentially a pair of suction cups that align and then can be used to pull together the 2 pieces. They do work, but the force they can apply is not comparable to good woodworking clamps. Here's what we're dealing with. I think it looks pretty good. A little sanding will be good. I've scraped some of that off now. So it's going to be a bit different because it's just a different slab. But I'd call it reasonably inconspicuous. I think maybe it'll age with the sun in the same kind of way. So I've added this bizarre looking clamping setup just because I can. I think I got a tiny bit more squeeze out there, look, so might make the joint a bit better. We'll see. In the cold light of day, it's not too bad. The other one of these just gave up in the night, which means we do have a bit of a lip there. On to the next one. Of course, pro fitters use a way more brutal solvent-based adhesive that goes off much quicker than the slow set epoxy I'm using. But this gives me the gift of more time to set up the joins. And I'm sure with well-prepared glue surfaces, this is really going to give us a strong joint. So next morning, this is what we've got. There was a big gap round here. You can see it's sort of sunken into it a bit there, whereas it's much more proud over here. Anyway, we'll try and use a razor blade now to flatten it out. We'll address that shortly, but first let's put this final piece on. This is supported under here with a piece of oak attached to the wall, but the joint really wants to be very strong as well to prevent seesawing action as weight's put on the outside edge here. Fine, okay, but it seems to have sunken down in places, so now we're masked up. Dribble a bit more in to try and fill up those little mini gaps you can see. We touched up the previous joint at the same time, and as our colour matching with the epoxy mix was getting way better, this left some nice joints. A sealing round the edges mistake to share with you here is using a similar colour masking tape as the sealant. When you tool down the sealant and it's the same colour, it's really hard to tell where the edge is. And when you peel it back, unless you got it just right, it leaves you with quite a bumpy edge. Much better to use a colour like this. Notice also we're adding weight to the sink by filling it before we do any of this sealing. Idea being the sealant will be in slight compression once it's cured and the water's empty, and then it's less likely to become gappy and fail over time. My vision of having one log going all the way along in a kind of book match style, I don't know, I'm questioning it. We'll see how we go. It's so wiggly, that's the problem. So the slab of oak that we resawed with the chainsaw mill earlier, that's been in the cottage acclimatizing and hopefully coming to that moisture content for ages, wiggled around a lot more, leaving me to do these measures you see here. This is the back of the dishwasher panel. Essentially, I'm turning the oak into something a bit like plywood with these almost full depth reinforcing strips here, while the relief cuts here allow me to uncup the board and flatten it down to the surface of the CNC. Now it's cut to size and flipped, I can try and surface the front side that's going to be visible to the kitchen. As you see, there's a few bits it hasn't hit. I'm going to have to get the old sander going on them the old school way. After some sanding, we have our first completed front, or back of front anyway. This face will be pressed against the dishwasher so it won't be seen, but I'm oiling it anyway just as a test. Here it is, the dishwasher panel. Time to give it some oiling. Lots of people will be filling this crack with epoxy, but I think it's quite nice. And just the less of that in the world, the better. It's pretty gorgeous dishwasher cover. I think I'm going to have to take a bit of some of this that we're going to need to cut off and stick it up there somehow in a sort of seamless manner. I mean, it's just amazing wood. It's also pretty damn difficult to work, being heavy, complicated, and fussy. And most importantly, twisted, cracked, and cupped. Here's where having a really bomb-proof CNC bed that's made of steel comes in handy. I can clamp these big metal bars over to flatten it down to the table. One cool thing about making these reinforcing pockets is that I can just find a scrap of hardwood about the right length, measure it with the calipers, and set the CNC to make that exact size hole. Then there's the option of whether you want to round off the corners of your insert pieces or square off the corners of the routed groove you've made. And I normally square off the groove because I like square corners. With those reinforcing strips in, we can now flip it over, get the front completely flat, make a few little reinforcing details, then use our thinnest cutting bit, which is 1/8 or 3mm more or less, to cut out the exact shapes of all the drawers. Exceptionally frustrating. I mean, look at that. The hinge covers up some, but yeah, definitely going to need to stick a new bit of wood in. Oh well, that might allow me to reinforce that a little bit on the back side. There's a little lip there, despite it being supported here. Yeah, that looks good. Now we just need a patch of a similar ilk. The only frustrating thing with this is when the tape itself gets stuck on the cutting bit. Extremely tight fit, but it's a good fit. I'll just chamfer the edges of that. The little insets with the chief tester.
Yeah, quite like that one.
And after that full throttle enthusiasm, I went ahead and made a whole bunch more of these, tweaking the design on each one. Finally, we settled on one that seemed like the perfect climbing hold kind of thing. Each of these things, it doesn't look like it, but actually takes many hours to make. If you factor in all the chainsaw milling and the kind of how this panel is irreplaceable among the whole set of panels, and how it's reinforced at the back and flattened and yada yada yada. Long and short of it is, it took a ridiculous amount of time to make just this single panel, and I don't want to muck it up. This top little one, which will come to be known as the compost straw, is where the slab was just not having enough material. So we're splicing in a bit just to stabilise that whole area and put some wood where there wasn't any. Then this one here is getting the structural bow tie to reinforce stroke hold on its corner. There's the bin drawer, all done. This door here, so one of those press fit type things. Anyway, enough of that. We've got to fit these drawers. Well, we've got the fronts of these units kind of covered nicely now. As you see, we're in need of a shoe rack of some description on the end. Pretty delicious, huh? Here we are, it's glued together. I didn't catch the glue up on film, but you can imagine it. It was like, the glue's drying, hit it with a hammer, no clamp over here, no, we need a clamp over there, oh shit, the clamp's fallen off and hit the CNC machine, that kind of thing. It's together now though, and not too gappy, I would say. Pretty pleased. Well, it may not be room for all our shoes, but it's definitely a lot better. There's some floor space near the door. Then we made these ash cupboards to go above the stove. They're housing the filter extractor fan gubbins with storage either side. The danger with cupboards is losing things at the back, so these are made deliberately quite shallow. Do love this bit as a handle. Sticks out slightly. On this side it's even better because it's just the way the natural edge takes it. And we've added this little thing here, which is just a bit of oak with a copper pipe on it. This poplar thing here opens up nicely. This thing pulls out and you can put the extractor on. What will be nice is that these doors open right the way back. And that did make it much easier to take out the old tap and put in this new boiling water one.
Please read and follow our step-by-step guide to the installation, operation and care for the electronic hot water appliance, and you will soon be making that first cup of tea or coffee from your new appliance. Oh yeah, it's brewing.
All these drawer fronts remain undone in this part of the kitchen, but for now we are cooking.